Do you ever get the urge to replay a Zelda game, but can't decide which one to play? This happened to me recently as I was looking through my collection of Zelda games, and I was trying to think of the entry with my favorite moments. What usually are my favorite moments? Well, the dungeons, of course. Then an idea popped into my head. Why don't I just play them all? Think of it as a greatest hits album of the Zelda series. I looked at my upcoming weekend, and I realized I didn't have much planned, so I laid out the groundwork for a new marathon. I scoured the web trying to get save files for the dungeons in every 3D Zelda game, and I set a 24-hour timer to see how much I can complete. I set some ground rules. I was only going to complete dungeons that give me a heart container, meaning no mini dungeons like the Ice Cavern or the final dungeons in the game. The reason I am not doing the final dungeons, they're usually very cutscene heavy, and I want to dedicate as much time as possible to actual gameplay. I was also not going to pre-game the dungeons, in other words, I wasn't going to practice them, besides some reminders on the Stray Fairies and Majora's Mask, which I'll get into later. It should be noted that I am by no means a Zelda speedrunner. I'm as casual as you can get. Here is my approximate amount of times I have beat each Zelda game. Keep in mind, most of these dungeons I have last done 5 to 10 years ago. So these are going to be rusty. The 24-hour challenge was a way to make it an endurance test of sorts. Sure, most puzzles in these games aren't that difficult, but after so many hours of trying to memorize dungeon layouts and item mechanics, it can get quite taxing. We are talking essentially about 24 hours of mazes here, so I got lost. I forgot how to do some boss encounters, and I think that was part of the fun. I mean, sort of. Please fucking just sometimes it lets me swim up nice, sometimes it doesn't. So before I detail the experience, let's do a count on the dungeons that we have in this series. Keep in mind, I'm only doing the 3D games here. We have 8 for Ocarina of Time, 4 for Majora's Mask, 6 for The Wind Waker, another 8 for Twilight Princess, 6 for Skyward Sword, and 4 for Breath of the Wild. If I'm doing my math correctly here, that's a total of 36 dungeons. Is it possible for a casual player who isn't using speedrun glitches to complete it in 24 hours? Well, watch to the end of the video to find out. And I mean, to the very end. Now, getting the save files to pull off this run was not as easy as I thought it would be. I absolutely scoured the web trying to get the appropriate save files for Project 64, Dolphin, and Cemu, or CEMU. Not entirely sure, never had to say that out loud before. Obviously, I had to use emulators since I only have 3 available save slots for the console releases, and I would have had to play hundreds of hours of content to make the saves available anyways. It made a lot more sense just to emulate it. For Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, it turned out to be easier to use a practice speedrunner ROM, which lets you edit the player inventory and warp to specific areas. It's almost like a debug menu. 9 save states for Ocarina and 4 save states for Majora's Mask, and I was done with that. You might be thinking, why did I make 9 for Ocarina? Well, it's because you both have a child and adult section to the Spirit Temple. On Majora's Mask, I tried to make my extra ability progression consistent, meaning I had to get the Stray Fairies and the Woodfall Temple and the Great Bay Temple so I could have double magic and double defense respectively. Now, when it came to Wind Waker, I found some save files for the Japanese version of the game that I believe was used for speedrunning also. I just hex edited some code and made them compatible with the US version. It took a little bit of research, but I figured it out. But that's also why my link is called Ababob. I was just going to deal with that. I already accidentally named my first link from Ocarina of Time A, so we're well past having good names for our main characters at this point. Now, I didn't use the HD version of the Wind Waker because I simply could not find the save files for it. I probably would have rather played that version, but it was still nice to go back to the GameCube version because I honestly go back and forth on which art style I prefer between the two. Twilight Princess HD, on the other hand, I was able to find the save files I needed, so I need to give thanks to Onat the Onat on Reddit. I couldn't ask for a better setup, except for the fact it was on hero mode. For those who don't know, hero mode is an extra difficulty option. That means you won't be able to find recovery hearts in the open field, and I believe you also take more damage. I was really hoping that wouldn't mess anything up for me. Now, Skyward Sword was easily the hardest game I had to find save files for. I had to use the Wii version, which was a shame since I really enjoyed playing the Switch version that came out last year. A Mr. Consummate Gamer on Game FAQs seemed to have the save files I needed. For some reason, I couldn't make his save for Ancient Cistern, Sandship, and Fire Sanctuary work at all. Once again, after hours of searching, I found some speedrunner saves for those specific dungeons, but they are on hero mode too. I figured I would just steal and hope it doesn't bite me in the butt later. For Breath of the Wild, I found an online save editor. Unfortunately, you can't just go back and replay the dungeons in Breath of the Wild. You can only redo the different Ganon fights in the dungeons. With all that prep work being done, I plugged in my USB N64 and GameCube controller, Bluetoothed up a Wii remote, and an Xbox One controller, and I was off. The child dungeons in Ocarina of Time went as well as I thought they would. I managed to complete all 3 of them in about 45 minutes. Now, if I wanted to complete all 36 dungeons in 24 hours, I needed to complete each dungeon in a 40-minute average pace, so I was feeling good, even if I knew that the first few dungeons are relatively short. Next, we had a personal favorite of mine, the Forest Temple, which went less smoothly than I wanted. Still, I managed to beat Phantom Ganon with just a bottle, and left 42 minutes later. Next was the Fire Temple, in which tragedy struck.
Well, crap. I don't know if you guys can hear me, but I blue screened, so that was fun.
I couldn't believe it. After all this setup, I got the blue screen of death for the first time in forever, which really messed up my splits and my local recordings, let alone the fact I was live streaming this, and people were waiting and watching. Once I was back up to speed, I had to replay most of the Fire Temple again, and manually adjust my timer accordingly. This was a big mood killer, and made my already long marathon even longer. Luckily, I haven't blue screened since, and it's been about a month, so I'm hoping that was a one-time occurrence. I was able to cheese the Volvagia fight and finish the Fire Temple with a few minutes under 2 hours on the overall clock. Next came the infamous Water Temple. I've always held the belief that this temple is nowhere near as bad as people seem to make it, as long as you remember where to adjust the water levels and you don't forget any keys.
I don't have the boss key yet. I don't have the boss key yet, do I? Shoot.
Well, I forgot a key. This was the longest dungeon yet, being completed in about 54 minutes.
Bruh.
The Shadow Temple was up next. I always forget how linear this dungeon is. Most of the challenge comes from remembering which chests are there to troll you with a blue rupee or a bundle of arrows.
Damn it. Are they both crappy? Yeah, they're both crappy. See, this game freaking trolls you.
33 minutes later, and I jumped ahead into the child section of the Spirit Temple. True to speedrunning fashion, I was already getting annoyed at how long some of the dialogue boxes are. Seriously, this Naburu conversation just keeps going and going and going. Of course, we have Kepora Gabora later. This dungeon wasn't too bad, but I spent way too much time in this room. After getting the gauntlets, I was about 20 minutes in and ready for the adult section. Now, I was truly embarrassed by my performance with this chest. Cue the "this has never happened before" GDQ stuff. After what felt like the longest boss battle ever with Twin Rova, I finished the Spirit Temple in about 50 minutes, which means I finished my first game out of the 6. Let's look at my timing for Ocarina. Not too bad, but this was the game I felt the most confident in. I haven't played Majora's Mask since the 3D version came out about 7 years ago. The last time I played the N64 version was probably 10 years ago. Also, I've never used an N64 controller to play it. let alone a bootleg USB one. I was a bit nervous about this one, to say the least. Woodfall went pretty well, all things considered. This room gave me some trouble, but all in all it wasn't too bad. Still, the boss was defeated about 30 minutes after starting the game. Fair warning, these next clips are going to be cringy, especially if you're a fan of this game.
Oh no! Whoa.
Okay. My only excuse is that I don't think this N64 USB controller is very good at all, at least control stick wise. And that's even considering my low standards for that particular controller. I mean, N64 wasn't really known for good control sticks. I wasn't only having issues with the spin move. If you look closely, I believe I got gypped here, costing me about 10 or 15 minutes in my confusion.
Pretty sure you just need fire arrows. Oh no, it worked that time. What the okay. Refresh the footage, because I'm pretty sure I shot like 3 arrows at it before.
With a sigh, I beat the usually pretty short Snowhead Temple in about an hour and 5 minutes. My longest dungeon so far. And we finally arrive at the Great Bay Temple. Oh boy, this went bad. Okay, for context, the last time I played this game, it was the 3DS version, which made some major changes to how Zora, Link, and the ice arrows work. Without the context of the previous area to tutorialize you, I just wasn't familiar enough with the controls to do well. Once again, never played with the N64 controller. For instance, I forgot how to do the underwater aura attack. I'm not even sure what you call that. The little glowy attack that Zora Link does. For some reason, I never tried the shield button. And in my bad memory, I was starting to think it was something that was added to the 3D version of the game. As such, I had some serious issues when fighting the boss. And combine that with the confusing design and issues grabbing the stray fairies, I completed the Great Bay Temple in a little over 2 hours. I gotta be honest with you, my morale was starting to drop, and I was getting tired and hungry. I looked at my timer in disgust at how long that took, and also in fear in just how much time I had left. Stone Tower was next. Due to the inversion nature of this temple, it can get quite confusing. I was starting to get annoyed at how often I had to play the Elegy of Emptiness, though that was mostly my fault since I tried to invert the temple before getting the light arrows. Whoops. Also, I forgot how to get up here. Unfortunately, Majora's Mask has turned into a laundry list of bad decisions and mishaps, as I completed Stone Tower in a bit over 2 hours. Looking at my splits, I was sad to see Majora's Mask taking more time than Ocarina of Time with less dungeons. But I was re-energized to start a fresh new game with The Wind Waker. It felt good to be on the GameCube controller as I began to make my way through Dragon Roost. You may be wondering why I didn't start with Forsaken Fortress, and that is simply because your first time around it doesn't give you a heart container, whereas the second time it does. It's not like the Spirit Temple in Ocarina of Time where you explore a different side of the dungeon between the child and adult sections. In the Forsaken Fortress, it is the same map with an added boss arena. Anywho, back on Dragon Roost, it went relatively smoothly, completing it in just over a half hour. Forbidden Woods felt like it went quickly, but I ended up spending about 45 minutes there. I blame it on all the times I messed up the flower jumps.
Ah, stupid flower!
I don't really have too much more to say about this one. Temple of the Gods is a cool dungeon, but can be slow due to all the cruising on the water with the King of Red Lions and all the statue puzzles. It's also where we learned the bane of my existence during Wind Waker, the command melody. Oh lord, the command melody. How this game way overused you in my opinion. Anywho, a bit over an hour later, and I was done with the Temple of the Gods. I reached the 12-hour mark around midnight, worried by the fact I wasn't as far as I'd like to be. I had some serious doubts that I could finish this run. I always felt like Twilight Princess had the longest dungeons, but I was hoping Breath of the Wild being short would offset that. Next up was my least favorite dungeon of the bunch, the Earth Temple. It's just a whole lot of this. And this. It's also just so bland. I swear, if the library from Halo was a Zelda dungeon, it would be the Earth Temple. I have no idea how they made an art style like this somehow become boring. It took me longer to complete than I'd like, mostly due to the fact I wasn't the quickest in finding the mirror shield. And it took me longer than it should have to realize Medley needed to be right by you when you learned the new song of the area. Also, I'm going to be honest with you, I completely forgot that you pick up the boss like he's King Babomb in Super Mario 64. The Wind Temple didn't fare much better. Honestly, I couldn't even remember this temple much. My last full playthrough of the Wind Waker was when the HD version came out. I ended up going up and down the central wind tunnel room, which wasted quite a lot of time. It was also around 3 in the morning, and my Java monster wasn't working as well as I'd like. I was a bit sleepy. I looked at my splits for the Wind Waker and how much time was left, and I knew I wouldn't complete all the dungeons this run. But I had to press on. Once again, the change of game gave me a bit of energy. I've always held the firm belief that Twilight Princess has the best dungeons in the franchise, and I was excited to play as many of them as I could. The Forest Temple went well, even on hero mode. I found myself being extra careful to not take unnecessary damage, because remember, you can't get recovery hearts on hero mode. The only real snag was me trying to do a bomb puzzle the wrong way for repeated attempts. Still, after about an hour, I was able to save the monkeys and move on to the next dungeon called Goron Mines. Goron Mines is interesting to me because my favorite mechanic is also my least favorite mechanic. I mean, look at this. How cool is that? But why is it so slow? God forbid you take a wrong turn somewhere and have to listen to this for an extended period of time. Also, I was getting pretty frustrated at this mini-boss because I didn't realize you had to hold A, and instead, I was just mashing it. Habit formed from so many games incorporating QTEs, and to be fair, the prompt didn't say hold. About another hour in, and I was out of there. Now, I was absolutely dreading the Lakebed Temple. Every time I play this game, I get lost here. I find it to be way worse than the Water Temple or Great Bay. Or at least I did. I actually went through this one relatively smoothly, oddly being my shortest Twilight Princess dungeon thus far. Maybe because I forced myself to be super attentive on this one because of the stigma I built of it in my head. Looking at the timer, I started worrying less about rushing and focused more on just making it to the 24-hour mark. I was excited to play the Arbiter's Grounds since it's one of my favorite dungeons, and boy, it did not disappoint. I love how the first half is a fun callback to the Ocarina of Time Forest Temple, and the second half has you Beyblading to victory. I swear to God, Breath of the Wild 2 needs to have a spinner. Just go ahead and bring it back. I would love it. Just go ahead, go to my change.org, sign the petition, and then we can go ahead and get this sprawl rolling. Or should I say, we should get this spinning? Huh? An hour and 11 minutes later, I made my way to the mansion at the Snow Peak Ruins. This is one of the most creative dungeons the Zelda team has ever pulled off in my opinion, but it is also one of the more tricky ones. What really cost me time was the fact I thought the second ice block puzzle was only for a piece of heart and not required. Also, I was struggling with this mini boss until I figured out the strategy. It just took me a few attempts. Just a few. Give me a break, guys. I was really tired, okay? As the timer ticked closer and closer to 24 hours, I found myself getting a little bit more energy. Call it a second or third or fourth wind. I don't know how many winds I was at, but man, was the curve going up and down. Sure, I was annoyed that I wouldn't complete all the dungeons this round, but I was still having a great time playing some great games, and that's what matters. At least that's what I was telling myself. That's all that matters. Right? After Snow Peak finished, I headed into the Temple of Time. This is a pretty linear dungeon, and I was confident I could finish this one, and then some. I will say I made a huge mistake in the final bit right outside the boss room.
Can I have the boss key? Oh shit. Where is the boss key?
I had to backtrack all the way back to the top floor of the dungeon and all the way back to the boss room. Since the dungeon already forces you to do this once, it essentially meant I had to do this dungeon twice over, leaving me just under 30 minutes left in the whole marathon. Kind of funny that my first boss in this marathon was Goma, and my last boss in this marathon was going to be an alternate version of Goma. It's like poetry, it rhymes. Last but not least is City in the Sky, another one of my favorite dungeons in the series. I knew I wasn't going to finish it, so I didn't really try to. I just kind of bumbled around in my tired but restless state. Eventually, it was over. I tried, but I just couldn't pull off the 36 dungeons. But that just wasn't good enough for me. That's right, boys, time to break out the crawfish PJs because it's time for the second quest.
Fucking stop.
Well, that was a big improvement, wasn't it? If for some reason you couldn't tell, yes, I went through all those dungeons again. To be completely honest, we also had a bit of a COVID scare, so I was in quarantine anyways, so it made sense to give this another shot. I had about 7 hours ahead of me. Honestly, plenty of time to complete Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild, but once again, I was pretty tired. And I love Zelda, I love it, but I was a little bit sick of it at this point. Even working on this video after the fact, I still wanted to play these games, but it was just hard to do such long sessions playing these games. Well, to finish off Twilight Princess, I had the Palace of Twilight to complete. This is easily one of my least favorite dungeons in Twilight Princess. Even though I love the atmosphere, it's super creepy, super cool looking, I love aspects of it, but the wall masters, these enemies just following you, are completely anxiety inducing, and I was not in the right state of mind to handle these right now. I don't like being followed. I definitely don't like being slowly followed. That's all I got. The Palace of Twilight was completed in about 54 minutes. Shockingly, all my Twilight Princess dungeons were pretty short. The only one being north of an hour was City in the Sky, and City in the Sky always felt like the longest one anyways, and it was just slightly north of an hour, if you look at my splits here. Alright, now it's time to work on Skyward Sword. Skyview Temple honestly took a lot longer than it should have. I was thinking these temples were going to be easier because they are more fresh in my mind after the HD release. For some reason I got hung up on a simple little puzzle in the beginning because I wasn't 100% sure where to go. I missed some vines to climb. Still, I mean, it wasn't that bad. It was just 46 minutes. I just feel like that dungeon's shorter in my head. I know if I did it a third time, I would do a lot better. Or I guess second time for this one. Next up, we have the Earth Temple. Just like the Skyview Temple, I felt like I got hung up a little early on because I always forget to bomb this wall to proceed into the dungeon. But still, this place is extremely short, all things considered. And honestly, one of the easier Zelda dungeon bosses that I can think of. So I don't really have too much more to say about the Earth Temple other than it existed. It happened. And next we have the Lenaru mining facility. This is the point in the game I think the dungeons actually get really good in Skyward Sword. I really like how this one's set up, the going back and forth between the past and present, with the past being more technology focused because Skyward Sword is weird, and the present, of course, being all dusty and sandy. It's a fun mechanic. I really like the gust bellows, even though Smash Brothers kind of ruined you in a lot of people's eyes. It is a longer dungeon for sure in the game. I didn't really feel like I got lost much. The only thing that took me a little bit was when you obtain the dungeon map, you're supposed to use the dungeon map to tell you the path you can actually walk into the sand. When you play the full game, the previous area kind of gives you a tutorial of sorts of that. So I kind of forgot when I was just doing the dungeon part that there's areas in the sand that you can walk in. Realistically though, it only cost a few minutes and I could move on to the next dungeon. Now, the Ancient Cistern I've always thought was one of the coolest dungeons the Zelda team's ever done. I'm a big fan of the whip. I'm a big fan of the upper and lower sections and how you have to go back and forth between them. And I'm a big fan of the boss. This boss is just really cool. The thing is, my save file started me with 6 recovery hearts, and basically that's it. No potions, nothing like that. Well, this is a mid-game dungeon, so, you know, the difficulty's ramping up a little bit. Meaning when I got to the boss, I just was not prepared. I ended up dying quite a few times just because I didn't have the resources. So that's unfortunately where a lot of my time came. I probably lost about 20 minutes on the boss alone, making it so I beat the Ancient Cistern in a little over 50 minutes. That clock was ticking closer and closer to 24 hours, and I still had 6 more dungeons to do. I knew the dungeons in Breath of the Wild are pretty short, but once again, I was just exhausted. Next up was Sandship. I love the concept of this dungeon. I think it's super cool that it all takes place on basically a pirate ship. I love, once again, the mechanic of going back and forth between the past and the present. It's a little bit more annoying to do that, I feel like, in this dungeon comparison to the other dungeon. The boss, once again, gave me trouble because I was on hero mode. I was trying to play it real safe on the boss, and one hit basically would kill me. There wasn't really too much I could do, so you kind of had to play it perfect. Eventually I got it, but I definitely felt like I wasted too much time, as it took me over an hour and 10 minutes to complete. And the last dungeon of Skyward Sword is the Fire Sanctuary. When I played Skyward Sword last year, I honestly could not remember this dungeon at all. Everything else I remembered pretty clearly. This one just escaped from my brain. What's funny is I felt exactly the same way playing it this time. I was like, yeah, I guess there was like another fire dungeon, but I can't remember anything about it. Once I started playing, I was like, oh yeah, it's the one that's kind of like Bomberman, where you kind of do the digging mitts thing. I guess it has to be my least favorite Skyward Sword dungeon just because it just kind of seems bland to me. I'm not sure why they did 2 fire-themed dungeons. Or at least I'm not sure why they didn't make them a little bit more distinct from one another. Not that I'm trying to give Skyward Sword a hard time. I love Skyward Sword. I think it's a great game. It's probably my least favorite 3D Zelda game. Even the worst 3D Zelda game is still a damn good game. Once Fire Sanctuary was done, I had about an hour to do 4 Breath of the Wild dungeons. I knew it could be done, but I was completely beat. 48 hours of Zelda is a lot of Zelda. Honestly, playing Breath of the Wild felt extremely jarring after playing all the previous Zelda games right before it. They're just so different. I love Breath of the Wild, but it just is a very different beast than what I just did before. Also, for some reason, on the save editor, I had my buttons swapped around. I didn't know you could change the jump button, but it made me transitioning from game to game even feel weirder. It took me longer than I'd like to complete Vah Ruta. I just had to remember how to do the water wheel puzzle. The next one I did was Vah Meadow. Keep in mind, you can do these dungeons in any order in Breath of the Wild. Hell, you don't even have to do these dungeons at all, except for Hyrule Castle. Vah Meadow wasn't as bad, but still, I was running out of time. It was really close, and at this point, my brain just felt fried. I wanted to do it so bad, but I was just struggling with basic concepts of video games at this point. My bed was right next to me, and boy, was it looking really comfy at this point. The next one I had was Vah Naboris, and my brain just stopped wanting to work. The clockwork rotating of the different sections of the big camel, my brain just did not want to process that at all. At this point, I knew I wasted a little bit too much time in the previous dungeons here, and unfortunately, it became clear that even after 2 attempts, I was not going to complete every single dungeon. I was really close. I did 34 out of 36. I was working on the 35th one, but I couldn't pull it off. But the thing is, I know I can pull it off. Of course, I just needed practice. The whole idea when I started this was I wanted to see what I would do without practice, and I have a pretty good idea for it. Turns out when you practice something or you do something a second or third time, who would have thought you'd do a little bit better? Well, I confirmed that. This is a challenge I can see myself doing again in the future. The next time I do this though, I want to have a lot better save files prepared, meaning no hero mode. I would have saved probably 45 minutes on Skyward Sword if I didn't have hero mode on. If I was able to get better save files for these games, I definitely would have completed the challenge the second run. But for now, I was happy. I did a lot, and I had a lot of fun, even when I was completely brain dead and tired. And hell, I feel ready for Breath of the Wild too. And I want to thank you guys for watching this video. I know it took a while to make. I haven't posted something in a long time. Almost every aspect of my life has changed since the last video I made. I want to keep making videos. I ended up writing some scripts and scrapping some scripts. I have a pretty good idea for my next video and I want to jump in. It's going to take some time, but if you're a fan of the From Pixels to Polygons work, then you'll probably like it. And this is the part of the video where I do my due diligence and ask you to like and comment and subscribe, even though I hate asking that. So if you want to do that, that'd be nice. If you don't, well, now I just feel awkward for, asking. Now, if you like this concept, I would love for you to try this challenge and I would love to hear how it goes. If you're streaming it, I would love to watch it as someone who's gone through it. I know speedrunners out there could just decimate me on this, which is totally cool, but I would love to see the casual viewer give it a shot. Thank you.